Uh, Maybe like slightly louder, but it's mostly good.
Okay, I get. So I am a researcher at the Public Policy School here at UC Berkeley. I have studied carbon trading and carbon offsets for the last 20 years since I did my PhD in India, looking at the effectiveness of the UN's United Nations offset program in the power sector there. So, yeah, I'm a full-time researcher. I work with undergraduate students and graduate students and other faculty and researchers to study the quality of these credits.
Okay, and could we get into what you think the quality of those credits is based off of like the research you found as like general trends for carbon credits? Is it an effective tool to mitigate climate change?
First, actually, is the question for you all. Is what is this group? What are you interested in? Like, do you need curiosity? Like, yeah, what is this?
Oh, yeah, sorry for not going over that earlier. I should probably go over the meeting outline. We're sort of time crunch because we only have 15 minutes left due to like the technical issues earlier. But the order for this meeting is basically we'll go over Barbara's question right here. We'll talk a bit about carbon offsets, and then we'll have some space open for Q&A. This club is, my club is the Politics and Philosophy Club, and then Samantha's club, who's the co-host of the meeting, is the One Green Step Club. It's an environmental advocacy club, and we are holding a joint meeting to discuss the intersections of climate policy and carbon offsets.
And carbon offsets. I just talk for five or so minutes about how these markets are working, how they're not working, and you know, maybe we should focus on questions since the time's so limited. So, basically, their first major carbon offset program was under the UN, where countries that signed on to the first major international climate agreement, where industrialized countries had caps and developing countries didn't have caps. Industrialized countries argue that greenhouse gases are well mixed in the atmosphere. It doesn't matter if we reduce emissions domestically or we pay for emissions to be reduced somewhere else. The atmosphere doesn't care, so why don't we do it where it's cheapest? So they created this offset program that allowed countries and companies to invest in projects anywhere in the world, estimate the emissions reductions, and count those reductions towards their domestic emissions reduction targets. Each credit should represent 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced or removed from the atmosphere. And since that first offset program, I've studied the quality of these programs. So the UN's program, California's program, and today's voluntary carbon market, which allows companies that have taken on climate targets voluntarily to buy credits to meet their reduction targets. A large section of the global economy has taken on a carbon neutrality goal to get to zero. And those voluntary offset market allows those companies to buy credits to help them to meet their carbon neutrality or their climate targets.
Okay, I think from that last week, we're probably thinking that the biggest issue would likely come from the voluntary market. And is that correct? Is that assumption correct?
No. So the compliance market, the UN's program, California's program, has significant over-crediting issues, and they're the same issues as the voluntary market. They basically work the same, and they have basically the same problems. So what our research found is that a lot of these projects that are generating credits are projects that would have gone ahead anyway, like wind power, solar power, hydropower around the world are already being built for a range of different reasons, and now they're generating credits that the buyer can use to meet their emissions reduction targets. But if those credits come from projects that would have happened anyway, the buyer should be able to claim those reductions as their own, right? So
Yeah.
that's a major problem. It's called additionality, right? Generating credits from what would have happened anyway. But then also the set of rules for how you estimate emissions reductions systematically over credits. So another common project type is avoided deforestation, where you pay for communities or businesses to reduce the amount that they deforest. But what we and others have found is that these projects, you first have to estimate the deforestation that would have happened without your offset incentive, and then you look at how much deforestation happens, and you're credited for not deforesting. And that not deforesting scenario, it's really easy for project developers to claim, like, oh, if you don't pay me these credits, everything's going to be lost in a few years. And the rule sets are not rigorous. They don't really enforce what sort of stories you're allowed to tell or not tell. So we have systematic overestimation of emissions in the baseline. That is what would have happened without the project.
And do you know within the UN especially why that problem hasn't been resolved, and what are the roadblocks?
Oh my God, it's so dark in here.
Yeah, so what I understand, so I've studied carbon credit quality for the last 20 years across all of the major programs. They all have represented significantly. And and with that background, of course, there has to be a structural reason why there's overcrowding, right? If this problem keeps repeating itself. My understanding is that it has to do with really a combination of uncertainty, complexity, and interest, where there's a huge amount of uncertainty, complexity in estimating emission reductions. The uncertainty comes, we know how to measure emissions generally pretty accurately. It's much harder to measure emissions reductions because you have to measure them against a counterfactual scenario of what would happen without the flow of money, and there's high levels of uncertainty in that. So what we have is high levels of uncertainty deliberated by a set of market players that all benefit from poor quality. And that is like, I'm holding these headphones, and if like these headphones worked for a month and then died, and sort of that happened regularly, the supply and demand on the market for headphones corrects that, right? Like the price of this goes way down, people buy other brands. For offsets, you're buying a claim, right? So basically everyone involved in the market benefits from exaggerated claims. So the buyer wants cheap credits, the seller or the project developer wants to get more credits for doing the same project or for doing less work. They hire the third-party auditors directly, so the third-party auditors have a conflict of interest because they're hired directly by the project developers and want to be hired. This is a problem inherent to many auditing systems in general, like including financial. And then the project rule makers, the registries, are competing for market share. And you take a look at the UN system, and you think like, oh, the UN is a trustworthy body. You would think they'd be able to do it well. But the UN is actually, in many ways, the worst case scenario for quality in something like this. Because if you take a look at who's making decisions for this offset program, there's a representative from a set of countries. Like the decision-making body is like 15 representatives. Each one represents a different country. And every country, every representative, they're primarily beholden to the interests of the country, not of the globe. So everyone is looking to weaken the requirements for projects in their own country, and to be able to capture more credits or generate more credits. So I think that's one reason why the UN system has continued to work really poorly for 20 years.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. I have a ton of questions about that, and I really want to talk about solutions. We might have to split this into like 2 parts, but I wanted to open up the last 5 minutes to Q&A. I'm, again, so sorry that it was so time crunched, but if anyone has any questions, please ask.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So I know that you were saying that the carbon offsets are like largely exaggerated. They don't actually do like as much good as they say they do. And you were talking about the deforestation and how like a lot of the times it could incentivize like if it's not met, more forest is like destroyed. But would you say that overall, even though they're exaggerated, do you still think that carbon offsets have a net positive for the climate crisis, or do you think that they're actually making the situation even worse?
That is a really good question, and in many ways it's at the heart of the debate over offsets. So the first thing to say is that offsets, in the locations where they play out, they're not you don't get more deforestation because of the offset program. It's just that the accounting is gained, that they're writing down that if the offset program hadn't happened, there would have been a lot more deforestation than there really would have been. And that's where the overcrediting comes from. It's just on paper. But the debate about offsets is that many people think about offsets as a source of funding for really worthwhile projects, like projects that reduce deforestation. And for that, if you're sending money to projects that reduce some deforestation, that's just a good thing, right? Even if you're exaggerating something, you still are having a positive impact by investing funds to good projects. The problem is that those credits are permits to emit. So when that money flows and the credits are generated, some company, it could be an oil company, it could be an airline, is going to buy those credits and use those credits instead of reducing their own emissions. And then they're going to sell carbon neutral flights or carbon neutral gasoline or carbon neutral milk because they bought those credits. And that's where you get overcrediting, that if the credits are exaggerated and someone buys those credits instead of reducing their own emissions, or to falsely sell carbon neutral products, you're reducing some emissions here, but you're actually increasing more emissions where the credits are not. So that's the problem.
That makes sense. And do you think that it would be worsened if we were to have a carbon tax at the same time as carbon offsets being able to be gained?
I mean, like many economists point to the carbon tax as a much better approach.
Okay. But they would have to be mutually exclusive, you're saying?
Not mutually exclusive.
Oh, okay.
The problem with a carbon tax is it's hard to get the price of carbon high enough to really drive reductions.
I see. Okay. If no one else has questions, I'll ask like a few more. Are we good with that?
Does everything make sense to everyone so far? We're talking about like carbon offsetting, so people like buying carbon, and so that it shows that you're actually carbon neutral when you're still exposing, like emitting greenhouse gases, but then you buy some money to go say like I'm planting some trees, so that takes up your greenhouse gases that you emit. So that's kind of what it's talking about, just as a brief outline of everyone. And then the carbon tax is just taxing people for buying gasoline or some sort of stuff like that. So if that kind of makes sense, then you can maybe ask some questions, if anyone. Hopefully that's a little better.
Okay, if not, then we have 1 minute left. I really would like to talk about the intricacies of how a carbon tax would work, and then more about like if reform is possible within the system of carbon trading. But unfortunately, our time is up. I was thinking maybe we might have another meeting later. I have stuff booked up for the next few weeks, but I will contact you, and if you all found it interesting, just let us know. Yeah, thank you so much, Brenda. Yeah,
Why? Pull up. But once you get a job for it, you can have it for a year. You can set her name.
And then I need.
I would be willing to do that if you guys wanted.
Yeah, it's totally better. So we just have quickly just need more time.
Because I've always thought about doing like a speaker series around environmental issues.
Yeah.
It'd be really nice. What's the name of your guys' code? Politics and
I mean,
okay.
we
So
could-
bring in like one, because I know there's a lot of